Christmas is a time for joy, traditions, and family and friends, but there have been a ton of incredibly strange mysteries that have happened at this time of year. From tragic stories to out-of-this-world anomalies, let's talk about some of the strangest cases that have happened around the holidays. On December 22nd, 1981, it was a quiet night in Valdez, North Carolina. 19-year-old Rhonda Hinson was driving home after her first ever company Christmas party. Rhonda worked as a clerical worker for a local steel company. Rhonda had just graduated high school the year prior, and she was excited about her future. She was popular and well-liked among her friends, family, and the local community. If you asked her friends, they would describe Rhonda as being vibrant and bubbly, excelling in tennis, and caring deeply about her loved ones. Rhonda was really excited to celebrate her first job as a clerical worker at that local steel company, and she seemed very optimistic and happy about her future. Rhonda seemed to have really enjoyed her time at the Christmas party, but at around midnight, she said goodbye to her coworkers, left the party, dropped off two of her friends, and eventually began the short drive home. Rhonda never made it home. At around 1 a.m., Rhonda's mother, Judy, woke up from her sleep, feeling an unbearable amount of dread. She later recounted, saying, "I felt like something had happened to Rhonda. I felt like she was dead." Rhonda's car was discovered on the roadside about half a mile from her house. The driver's door was open. Just a few feet away, Rhonda's lifeless body lay on the ground, her arms placed at her side. A single bullet had pierced through the trunk, through her seat, and into her heart, ending her life. This shot had apparently come from a high-powered rifle, and this shot was also so ridiculously precise that it almost seemed like it happened by absolute random chance. Maybe it was an accidental hit, and Rhonda was maybe caught in the crossfire? But here's the thing, as more details started coming together, this seemed less and less like it was an accident. Like honestly, what are the chances of this happening unless if it was done intentionally? Like if this shot was random, it would have been an absolute fluke, like a 1 in a billion chance of ever happening. On top of that, the person who took the shot must have been an expert because of how precise it was. What initially appeared to be a random act of violence would soon unravel into a case full of unsettling clues and possibilities. For example, as told by family and friends, in the months leading up to her death, Rhonda's bubbly and positive attitude began to slightly change. Rhonda began to act more secretive, withdrawn, and unusual compared to her normal behavior. For example, she would often ask her father to come along with her on errands because she was afraid of something or someone. But when pressed with questions, she would never properly explain what she was afraid of. Rhonda once told her father that she had something that was troubling her. When pressed with more questions and to explain further, she simply said, "I'll think about it." She never ended up revealing what was on her mind. Her mother, too, recalled a strange conversation days before the tragedy. Rhonda asked if it was ever okay to date a married man. Her mother's response was that, "There's never a time that it's all right. It only ends in heartbreak." So maybe it was a situation where Rhonda got caught in between a relationship between a married couple, which ended in violence. Rhonda also randomly started showering in the middle of the night on a more frequent basis, explaining to her mother that she often felt dirty. Something important to note in this case is that Rhonda had an on-again, off-again boyfriend from high school named Greg McDowell. On the surface, their relationship seemed like it was going great, but Greg was known to be very possessive of Rhonda. He would constantly write her notes and would get frustrated when she wouldn't reciprocate his feelings. Eventually, they split apart after high school when Greg went to college, but Greg's mom worked at the same steel company that Rhonda worked at. Rhonda told Greg's mother before the Christmas party that if Greg was going to the party, she wouldn't go. There was a newspaper article that also explained that Greg's mom was pressuring Rhonda to go with Greg, but Rhonda refused to go with him. So there's some weird stuff happening here in this relationship where kind of the parents are getting involved, trying to get them together. Greg is possessive of Rhonda as well. I don't know. It's really strange. It's a really strange situation, for sure. Greg even called Rhonda a few times as she was getting ready for the party, but these calls were very brief. After the party, Rhonda was actually considering sleeping over at a friend's house, but apparently at some point Greg called her and she decided to head home for the night. So regarding Greg and his family, there's some definite strange things that are happening here. In Greg's initial interview with police, he claimed to believe that Rhonda had gone straight home that evening. However, in a later interview, he admitted knowing she was at her friend's house. A stuffed animal, which Greg and Rhonda had purchased together on a trip to Myrtle Beach, was found in Rhonda's car after her death. It was apparently not in her car when she left her house earlier that evening. That's a major red flag. Greg later claimed the stuffed animal had been on his dresser, which led to even more questions about how it ended up in Rhonda's car that evening. This is a major red flag here. This is something really concerning, and I had to really dig a bit to find this information on this case. Greg's first polygraph test was inconclusive, though this does not immediately mean that he was guilty. Greg's father, who provided Greg's alibi, refused to take a polygraph test, claiming his word as a pastor should be enough. Years later, Greg actually passed a second polygraph test, but during the examination, he reportedly broke down in tears and asked, "What about my daddy?" Yeah, what about my daddy? I have no idea. I don't know what's happening here. Was the dad involved? Well, let's continue. After divorcing Greg's father, his mother reportedly told investigators that she and Greg had long suspected Greg's father was involved in Rhonda's murder. However, many think that this claim could have been influenced by her being upset at the divorce. Rhonda's family and friends, along with law enforcement, have expressed suspicion about Greg and his family's potential involvement in the case. In my opinion, there's just so many red flags here with this family. I don't know if they did this, but there's a lot of odd stuff that are happening. The stuffed animal in particular is really strange. It's a really strange part of the mystery. And could this potentially be evidence towards solving this case? I don't know. While Greg has consistently denied involvement and he passed the polygraph tests, the continuing questions about his behavior, the stuffed animal, and his family's actions have kept speculation alive and have kept them as potential suspects, especially to people investigating on the web. But at this point, the trail runs cold, and it doesn't seem like there's enough evidence to charge them for the crime. So were there other witnesses? Well, yes, there were. On the night of the murder, a few witnesses reported seeing a suspicious blue Chevrolet near the site of the murder. 2 men were seen sitting inside the vehicle, parked oddly close to the off-ramp that Rhonda used. 30 minutes later, another witness saw a similar car speeding away from the scene. A second witness described seeing Rhonda's car, her body slumped over the steering wheel, and a man standing at her door. Mistaking the scene for a drunken mishap, the witness continued driving. The man standing at the door was described as being around 5'10" to 6 feet tall, with a medium build and dark brown hair. The amount of guilt the witness must have felt after must have been terrible. Police also found unidentified fingerprints on Rhonda's driver's side door that they believe might belong to the killer, but they haven't been able to identify the person as of today. To uncover more, police turned to hypnosis as they were pretty much running out of ideas at this point. So one thing I noticed in some of these cases that I've covered is that police will often use hypnosis or psychics to kind of try to figure out the case, but it often doesn't really go anywhere. And I don't know. is this still a thing? Like, do people still use psychics and hypnosis? And does anything really get kind of solved because of it? I guess it does because it's used pretty frequently, but I don't know. Anyways, let's move on. Under a hypnotic trance, a witness described the blue car in detail. It was a 70s model Chevrolet Chevelle with a damaged primer-coated front end. The witness also mentioned another vehicle, a dark Trans Am parked nearby, and this was possibly connected to the murder. After all of this, the investigation pretty much stalled, and there haven't really been any updates since. Decades later, Rhonda's death remains unsolved. During this time, her mother kept her room exactly as it was, as a tribute to her daughter and the absolute tragedy of the loss of her life. Was Rhonda Hinson the target of a stalker or a scorned lover? Was she a victim of someone she trusted? Or did she simply cross paths with the wrong person at the wrong time? At this point, we don't know, and this case remains unsolved. Rhonda's story is a reminder of how fragile life can be, even during the holiday season, and how important it is that in times of danger and fear, to lean on your loved ones or friends so that they can protect and help you with any issues that you may have. As we celebrate the holidays, let's not forget to prioritize our own safety and the safety of those around us. On Christmas morning in 1964, at around 1:25 in the morning, in the small town of Warminster in the United Kingdom, most people were sleeping in anticipation of Christmas Day being a few hours away. For example, Mildred Head was sound asleep in her home, probably dreaming about the magical time of Christmas. Suddenly, though, there was a giant sound coming from the roof of her house. Now, I know what you're thinking. This has got to be Santa. But surprisingly, it wasn't. The sounds were like twigs brushing the tiles, and they only got louder and louder until it sounded like giant hailstones. Eventually, Mildred got out of bed to look out the window, but found nothing there. The night sky was clear, and there was no hail, rain, or crazy winds. She did hear a humming sound though, and that humming sound grew louder and louder before suddenly fading to a faint whisper. That same morning, soldiers at the nearby Nook Camp Army base were awoken by the sound of something similar. So how they described it was that it sounded almost like a huge chimney stack being ripped from the rooftop and then scattered across the whole camp. Imagine just going about your day and then you hear a bunch of roofs of houses go up in the air and then just come crashing down. I mean, personally, I would definitely freak out at that noise. Roger Rump and his wife also heard the noise, and they related it similarly. How they saw it was 5,000 tiles on their roof being ripped off and then put on again with an enormous clatter. I'm trying to imagine that sound, and it would honestly be just terrifying if it came out of the blue. Another local named Marjorie By also had a strange experience. At around 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, Marjorie woke up, she got dressed, and she started to walk down to church for Christmas Mass. Suddenly, she began to hear some unsettling noises near Bell Hill. Marjorie described it as sounding like branches being pulled over gravel, and she even called it savage sound waves. By the end of Christmas Day, though, over 30 individuals reported hearing these mysterious sounds. Now, this strange occurrence began on Christmas Day, but there was more to the story in the months and years ahead. A couple of months later, in February of 1965, an entire flock of pigeons suddenly died in the town. In March, 3 families heard loud noises above their houses, with their roofs and windows even shaking from the force. In June, many residents began seeing UFOs flying throughout the sky. They were described as being cigar-shaped and covered with winking bright lights. Some described it as twin red-hot pokers hanging downwards, one on top of the other, with a black space in between. On August 17th of the same year, a detonation noise rocked the town's Boreham Field housing estate. After this, there was a monstrous orange flame that was seen in the sky, and that flame was seen crackling and hissing. Like at this point, what is going on here? This is all happening within like a few months. So I don't know, this is wild. These events were the beginning of a bunch of strange UFO sightings known as the Warminster Thing. These sightings would happen over the decades after this point, but they mostly happened during that year, so from the end of 1964 to about the end of 1965. Considering this was the 1960s, and UFOs were all the craze by this point, Warminster ended up becoming a UFO sighting hotspot, and many started coming to the town to try to get a glimpse of these UFOs. I mean, if you're in the area, why not have a nice little day trip to check out some UFOs, right? Sightings and experiences in the late 1960s included a ball of crimson light in the sky and terrible droning sounds that made homes and beds shake. By the 1970s, though, sightings began to decline, and so visitors in the town declined as well. With less and less sightings, the phenomenon of the Warminster Thing kind of disappeared. But Warminster is still regarded by many as the UFO capital of the UK, and there are still reported UFO sightings today. But there's still no answer to what the Warminster Thing was, and this mystery remains unsolved. So my initial thoughts on this were that it could have been some type of military testing, as there were military bases nearby, and oftentimes many people think there's UFO sightings when it's just the military testing out or using their latest tech. Oftentimes there's UFO sightings near military bases, and some think that it's either new tech or maybe aliens hanging out and taking joyrides near the bases, but who really knows, right? Also, the military denied that this ever took place, that they were doing any kind of testing of crazy alien tech or something along those lines, so who knows? Something interesting though is that Warminster is about a 30-minute drive away from Stonehenge, a place that's been shrouded in mystery throughout history. Could there be some connection to this ancient mysterious site, as there are many that believe that Stonehenge is also a UFO hotspot? There have been many occurrences throughout history where a town will just go through it for a period of time with UFO sightings and odd occurrences, and then it just randomly ends out of the blue. For example, the Basel phenomenon in 1566, the Belgian UFO wave in the early 1990s, and even others such as the Phoenix Lights, the mystery airships in the late 1800s in the United States, and just many, many more. So basically what happens is that there's towns and cities or areas that will just go through a ton of UFO sightings over a short period of time, and then eventually it just kind of disappears completely. So maybe that's has something to do with it, but who knows? I'm not too sure. Also, could this just all be mass hysteria though, as people really started looking for these odd anomalies? Like if you're looking for something strange, you're probably gonna find it. Honestly, I'm just trying to throw as many theories as I can out here, but I honestly don't know what's happening here. The optimist in me though wants to believe that this is all true, and that all these strange occurrences were some legitimate UFO activity or other phenomena. But regardless, the Warminster Thing continues to be a legend in the area, and there are still many believers of it to this day. Whether the sounds were from an earthly phenomenon or something beyond, they remind us to approach the unknown with open minds and a little side of caution. As the holiday season approaches, let's carry that same sense of curiosity into our celebrations, enjoying the magic of the season, but also making sure to stay safe. There are certain cases that you'll read and you'll think that there's a logical conclusion. And for the first two cases that we've discussed, there may be a logical conclusion for both. But there's always a case that is just so incredibly strange that it comes out of the blue, and there's no real answer for what happened. This is the case for this next one. On Christmas Eve in 1885, so we're going really far back, in the small farming town of Seneca, Illinois, there was a couple named Patrick and Matilda Rooney. It was a normal Christmas Eve, nothing out of the ordinary. The Rooneys were having dinner and drinks with their farmhand, John Larson. Excited for Christmas, the drinks poured and it was a very fun night. John then went upstairs in the guest room to get some sleep. So this is when the night was about to become very strange. You see, throughout the night, John Larson started having terrible coughing fits, but he was able to somehow sleep through them. When he woke up though, he noticed that there was soot and grease residue on his pillow. Thinking that there may have been a fire, he jumped out of his bed and began making his way down the stairs. He could also see some traces of soot and grease residue on the walls, but there was nothing to indicate that there was a serious fire in the house. But John was about to discover something absolutely terrible. John opened the door to Patrick and Matilda's bedroom and saw Patrick laying there. He walked up to him and discovered in horror and shock that Patrick was dead. There was no sign of Matilda anywhere though, and so John began to look through the house. That was when he got to the kitchen. It was there where he saw a blackened hole in the kitchen floor. He then realized that he had discovered Matilda, or what was left of her. The charred remains of Matilda Rooney were in the hole in the kitchen floor, as if she were burned alive. John Larson's life was only saved because he slept behind a closed door on the second floor, while Matilda and Patrick were on the first floor. Patrick had suffocated from the fumes in the other room of the house. The odd thing was that the house was pretty much intact. Like if there was a fire, there would have been a ton of damage in the house, especially in the kitchen where Matilda's charred remains were. But besides some soot and grease residue, there was absolutely no damage. Investigators had absolutely no reason to suspect foul play. It was almost as if she burst into flames out of the blue. The flames were also so hot that the estimated temperature was 1400 degrees Celsius, or around 2500 degrees Fahrenheit. So right off the bat, investigators suspected Larson, as why wouldn't they? But the issue was that it was near impossible for Larson to start a fire without damaging the rest of the house. Also, John Larson was cleared of any wrongdoing early in the investigation due to the outline on his bed that showed he stayed in his bed that night and slept. But what does that honestly mean? So his outline was a certain way and it was a certain depth, so he never moved? Or I don't know. Some think that he had a hand in this crime, and somehow maybe sleepwalked through the crime, but for him to commit the crime and go right to bed upstairs is both highly strange and unlikely. But there is a bit of a sad story with John Larson. He unfortunately also passed away 2 weeks later due to the amount of lung damage he had, and an autopsy later showed large amounts of soot and grease residue in his lungs. So him staying at the scene of the crime and then passing away due to the amount of soot in his lungs kind of absolves him of the crime, in my opinion. At this point, it seems unlikely that he did it. But there was another suspect in this case. Patrick and Matilda's son, John Rooney. So John Rooney was in line to inherit the farm and gain financially from his parents' death. But after investigation, there was also no evidence at all that he committed the crime, because there was no evidence of anyone trying to start a fire intentionally in the house. There was also no source of ignition for the blaze either, but some type of fire was strong enough to reduce Matilda Rooney to ashes. The Rooneys had also apparently been relaxing and having a few drinks of whiskey throughout the evening, like many do on Christmas Eve. But somehow it led to all of this. How? Spontaneous human combustion dates back to the 17th century, but there have been cases of this happening in the last few hundred years. Victims were often alcoholic and overweight, and were more often female than male. So maybe it could have been a negative reaction to the alcohol that caused this to happen. Also, is spontaneous human combustion an actual thing, as there really isn't a ton of scientific evidence on it, because it really doesn't make sense in a way. Like, how could a body just burst into flames and insulate the fire to within the body? Also, the concentration of alcohol needed to start a fire that large would normally kill somebody if they ingested that much. Could it maybe be the clothing that they wear that is susceptible to fire? But at the same time, then why was the rest of the house not damaged? Maybe the Rooneys were drunk and didn't notice a growing flame on Matilda until it was too late. This is an incredibly horrific way to lose your life, but there is still no answer to this case. With other cases of spontaneous human combustion over the years, I wonder if we'll ever get a further explanation on this someday. If you know more about this concept, please let me know in the comments below. So when combustion occurs, 3 things are needed: an ignition source, fuel, and an oxidizing agent. The human body is really difficult to burn, as it's made up mostly of water, but fat in a body or hair and clothing can definitely ignite, so that might explain how the body burned, but the surrounding area was fine. So Dr. Clendenning, who conducted the medical investigation of this case, said that when he entered the house, there was a very unpleasant smell. He confirmed that Patrick Rooney had died due to smoke inhalation. In the kitchen, there was a large table with a partially burned candle and a large hole burned through the wooden floor, where Matilda's ash and bones were underneath. But nothing else, there was no real other damage to the property. Regardless, this is an incredibly strange mystery, and spontaneous human combustion continues to be a mystery to this day. Like we said earlier, there have been other cases of spontaneous human combustion, but at this point, there's no real answers. Did Matilda pass away due to spontaneous human combustion? Who knows? But there's not really another plausible theory for what happened to the Rooneys on Christmas Eve. So to this day, the case of Matilda Rooney remains unsolved. What do you think happened? Please let me know in the comments below. The tragic case of the Rooneys is a reminder of how fragile life can be, even during the Christmas season. It's really important to stay mindful, whether it's watching over candles or keeping an eye on loved ones. Dangers can even lurk in the home. So please stay safe this holiday season. From unsettling deaths to strange sights in the skies, there have been some odd occurrences that have happened around Christmas. Even though it's considered by many to be a magical time of year, just like any time of year, the holidays can definitely be very strange. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also click that little notification bell to stay updated on my newest videos. Thank you so much for all of your continued support, and as always, never stop wondering.